You are listening to Inside IASB, a podcast series dedicated to informing and encouraging Illinois School Board members. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Isaac Warren, and I am the Director of Digital Communications at the Illinois Association of School Boards. And with me today, I'm welcoming back Dr. Perry Hill IV, who is Director of Outreach and Training here at the Association. And we're talking about board readiness for a superintendent transition. It's a new workshop from the Association. We're really excited to be talking about it and hopefully getting some people interested in taking it. So, Perry, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It's appreciated.
Absolutely. Well, let's just get started. Can we talk about why board readiness is such a critical but often overlooked factor in a successful superintendent transition? And how does this workshop help boards address that issue head on?
Board readiness stands as a critical factor in a successful superintendent transition because public expectations of accountability and alignment do not diminish with the exit or the entry of any superintendent. The board serves as the stabilizer of the district throughout any transition. As such, an informed and proactive board leading throughout a superintendent transition process safeguards the district. And when I mention the term safeguard, that board is safeguarding the public's district perception. They're also safeguarding the district performance. They're safeguarding district productivity, and they're also safeguarding district positioning of staff. Now, I want to take this time to just throw out a quote from Dr. John Carver, who has the nickname of being the father of board governance. He amplified the board's critical and universal purpose when he said the board exists to be accountable that its organization works. Now, this is true for superintendent transition, and it's also true for every other work of a board. Now, regarding your second question, this workshop helps boards by presenting focus areas where board attentiveness yields acts of accountability. The workshop is entitled Board Readiness for a Superintendent Transition. Now, board readiness implies ideal conditions have been met to optimally advance toward the achievement of a quality return. Now, this workshop highlights that the ideal condition for boards enduring a superintendent transition involves a proactive stance. The quality return from this stance and the workshop is securing a district-compatible, overly competent superintendent.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think it's one of those steps where when a board's ready for a new superintendent, they don't maybe always think about how ready are we for a new superintendent. They're just like, well, we need one. They're retiring or they left. We need to get a new superintendent. But there's a lot of groundwork that needs to be covered here. And so that kind of leads me to my second question here. What gaps do you in your work most commonly see when boards think they're ready for a superintendent transition, but they're maybe overestimating their preparedness?
I'm going to throw out two words. Brace yourself, okay? I have witnessed much. Well, gaps most seen when boards think they are ready for a superintendent transition. I'll give you the first of a number of gaps that I have witnessed. Boards that conduct the search process in isolation. Certainly, this level of autonomy is to be commended, and it works for some, but there is a benefit to involving executive search firms who are neutral parties with specialized skills and staff. These firms can offer advisement and expansive options to aid boards in reaching an ideal end to its superintendent transition. Now, that's just one. Another gap that I have witnessed is what I would call passive responses or blind complicity to district reports. Now, this gap addresses boards that passively accept reported information without question. And they do not seek clarification, they do not seek advisement, nor do they offer board direction to administration when it is truly needed. During a superintendent transition especially, reasonable, relevant questions should be asked. But systems of the board, such as committees, should also be used to both provide affirmation and verification of the district information that's being presented. Such questioning and verification processes should really not be viewed as exhibiting a lack of confidence in administration or promoting dissension, disunity among the governance team. Rather, utilizing these processes serves as a supplementary means of enhancing member awareness, increasing board administration trust, achieving outcome and data verification, and validating support for the exiting administrator. I mean, after all, the board should know the status and outcomes involving all district areas prior to the departure of the outgoing superintendent. Failure to know these ends and to enact accountability measures when necessary may present catastrophic district-altering surprises for the new governance team. Another gap that I have observed has to be assumptions about the board policy manual that all is well simply because we have one. Well, having a board policy manual is not the same as having an updated, complete, board-reviewed board policy manual. Ideally, the updates and possibly upgrades to the board policy manual should be done prior to a superintendent transition so that the board and the public have access to the most timely, applicable guidelines, and they're able to really expound upon the board-superintendent partnership, the superintendent position, and the stages of a superintendent transition, which are embedded within Section 3 of the policy manual itself. Now, let me add to this particular gap on policy assumptions. The reality is that this gap on policy assumptions also encompasses the lack of policy awareness among some board members. Board members should have knowledge of policies applicable to the superintendent and a superintendent transition. Failure to have such knowledge can stifle an effective superintendent transition. As such, addressing board policy manual needs provides opportunities for each member to be exposed to key content in Section 2 and Section 3, which pertains to board readiness for the superintendent transition. But there's more. So another gap, an important gap that I do want to mention is the disregard for the superintendent evaluation mandate. Unfortunately, some boards still do not evaluate the superintendent, even though statute mandates that they do. Now, this decision hinders boards from fully understanding board and district needs throughout the superintendent transition process. Yes, the superintendent evaluation process addresses the current superintendent, but its outcome also gives the board foresight on deficiencies and duplications of sound superintendent leadership. And the board can use this information, this foresight, in order to gain information and explore the qualifications of all of the potential candidates. But there's more. So another gap that I would mention in regards to your question is misunderstanding the board's role and the superintendent's role. The board collective must understand its governance role and its level of involvement in upholding accountability among its outgoing employee as well as its incoming employee. Boards must refrain from taking a hands-off or governance-off approach despite the presence of an outgoing superintendent. The board is still charged with fulfilling its oath. They're still charged with making sure that all statutes are abided. They are still charged with making sure that their policies are put in place, their processes are enacted, and they are charged with still carrying out governance throughout the time span of that superintendent transition. Failure to maintain board governance within the district could introduce uncertainty and instability during a crucial time for the district. But there's more. So another gap that I would like to mention is minimal to no community engagement about the superintendent transition. Boards preparing for a superintendent transition should strive to communicate and engage its community about the process. If deemed appropriate, boards should weigh the levels in which to inform, consult, involve, and collaborate with the community to ensure the public maintains a positive district perspective and perception throughout this process. But there's still more. Another gap that I have witnessed with some boards is the absence of district goals or a lapse in goal adherence. This absence or lapse disrupts the overall continuity of a district. It prompts boards to approach a superintendent search uncertain and unsettled about the exact needs of the district, along with displaying unity on the asks of the candidates who are vying for the superintendency position. Now, my experience with some boards that do not have goals or have a lapse in goal adherence under an outgoing superintendent is that these boards tend to press forward with their superintendent transition, knowing that developing district goals will serve as an early board act with the new superintendent. But there's still another gap I want to mention. That other gap is disregarding the need to operate as a trustee board. A trustee board upholds its fiduciary duty by practicing decision-making based on what is in the best interest for the greater good and the long-term good. In contrast, boards that operate as a delegate board practice decision-making based on special interest influences for short-term and personal agenda development. Board readiness for a superintendent transition is hindered by delegate boards. Even more, the superintendent transition process becomes both complicated and combustible with delegate boards operating outside of what is supposed to be objective decisions of the board collective. So those are some of the primary, I would say also recurring gaps that I have witnessed when it comes to boards and their thinking in regards to the superintendent transition.
Sure, yeah. And, just going off of the sheer amount of potential pitfalls and the ones that you've seen, not only at least once, but recurring, it sounds like, this workshop's really in sore need across our state.
Very much so.
And so it's a good thing we're offering it here. And I will say, I think a common thread I've noticed in your answers was a lot of the board's pitfalls it's just not ongoing maintenance that they're doing throughout the whole year. They might think, let's address if we're ready for a superintendent when we need one, as in when the superintendent's telling us we're going to leave. That sounds like it's way, way later than what it's supposed to be, because you're not making sure you're keeping your policy. How much dust is on your policy right now? Things like that. There's just a lot of maintenance to be going.
And the reality is, good practice is good practice. If it's good enough to occur when the board needs to seek a superintendent, it's good enough for the board to promote in those times when they have a superintendent.
So how should boards adapt their onboarding approach when a new superintendent is a first-time leader versus someone with extensive superintendent experience?
Boards should not adapt their onboarding approach for a new superintendent, no matter if that leader is a first-time leader or a leader with extensive superintendent experience. The board's expectations should be high for its chief executive officer, and there should be no compromise in the levels of efficiency, effectiveness, and excellence the board demands. The quality of the onboarding that you mentioned hinges upon clear, concise, mutual ongoing communication. Early onboarding, it may include a 90 to 120-day transition plan. It may include a one-on-one meeting with board members and that superintendent. It may include a community meet and greet. It may include the creation of board superintendent communication expectations. It may include the creation of board protocols. It should include the creation of those expectations and protocols. If the board was truly ready for its superintendent transition and selected its CEO wisely, then the incoming superintendent, regardless of previous superintendent experience, will be prepared to serve without the board altering its onboarding approach. So that's my opinion on that particular matter.
I think that's really good because it's less work for the board to have to work with to adapt that type of work for a new superintendent. They're expected, you're almost like a drop-in replacement. All right, if we're as ready as we want to be, and the superintendent we're bringing in is as ready as they need to be, ideally, it really should be about as seamless as possible.
Well, and I'll just say this too: high expectations are high expectations, and they really should never change based upon an individual's experience, because ultimately the aim of a district, of the board, is to ensure that the best individual is in place to aid in the district fulfilling the dreams of its students.
And that kind of leads me to my next question here. So how does this workshop help boards clarify and align expectations before the superintendent is hired so that the relationship starts strong instead of needing repair later?
This workshop strives to ensure that boards are knowledgeable about key areas of the board's work with a superintendent transition, and it aims to verify that these areas are either in or moving toward an optimal state as the new superintendent begins. Also, this workshop promotes board accountability by emphasizing an employer process for bringing closure to one employee's tenure and transitioning to that of the successor.
Gotcha. Perfect. Yeah. And I think it's going to be, again, just all of what we talked about so far, I think is really driving home the point. Like this workshop, if you're even considering a new superintendent, you just need to probably take this workshop just because there's got to be at least one pitfall we've listed that's probably already happening in that board. Kind of moving on to, we've been talking a lot about the hiring process. I'll kind of go to the other end of that process. So how can boards strike the right balance between continuity and change when a long-tenured superintendent departs?
Regardless of the length of a superintendent tenure, a board must be relentless in striking and achieving the right balance between continuity and change. The right balance, as you put it, should never be static or fixed when it comes to an organization or its leadership, lest complacency arises. Board superintendent partnerships that yield and maintain the right balance do so because of a practice called weight shifting. Now, if one can bear with me, number one, and then imagine a traditional balance beam scale that's found in many physician offices. The health attendant asks the patient to step onto a metallic, typically silver, scale platform. A balance beam at the top of the mechanism usually tilts immediately up or down. The attendant then begins sliding and shifting weights along the balance beam until the beam stabilizes and presents a balanced weight of the patient. Well, this offers a glimpse into the realities of how districts achieve and maintain the right balance. Foreseen and unforeseen circumstances will always present challenges to districts and threaten to upend what they think is the right balance. But it is the innovation and inventiveness of one or both board superintendent partners that prompt movement to shift the weight of the moment in order to regain or retain the right balance. So as such, the presence, the use, the monitoring of district goals should always prompt weight shifting. The effort to achieve superintendent contractual goals should always prompt weight shifting. Changing academic standards should always prompt weight shifting. The pressing of community norms upon a district should always prompt weight shifting. Ultimately, board readiness for a superintendent transition aids the board in selecting the right candidate and partner at the right time to continually strike the right balance for the district, no matter the challenge.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. And I think it's really good that you mentioned you can't be rigid about this. You have to be pretty nimble and flexible.
Very much so.
And yeah, I think it's helpful because if you're too rigid, you're kind of setting yourself up for a personal roadblock.
Yeah, and also regression.
Yeah, sure.
Because people get comfortable, and unfortunately, sometimes when individuals get comfortable, they get laxed as well. That's that complacency piece that I mentioned previously.
Complacency, yeah.
Although you use the term one size fits all, I prefer to use the term uniform approach. These approaches offer consistent methods applied across situations to address challenges with efficiency and ingenuity. Boards can prepare for different types of superintendent transitions by holding firm to a bedrock uniform approach that elaborates upon their governance obligation. Now, I know you and many of the listeners are probably wondering what this bedrock uniform approach to the governance obligation might be. Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Well, they are called the foundational principles of effective governance. So we're talking about the board clarifying the district purpose, the board connecting with the community, the board employing a superintendent, the board delegating authority, the board monitoring district performance, the board taking responsibility for itself. No board can predict what will prompt a superintendent transition, nor can they anticipate the type of superintendent transition with which the board must contend. However, a board that reflects upon its duty to govern and how it consistently governs will find that it can be adaptable and adamant, as well as ready and resourceful.
Perfect. Yeah, and I'm glad this episode's coming out right in the middle of our series on the foundational principles of effective governance. And if you're listening at home and haven't listened to the episode on the third principle, which is hiring a superintendent, highly encourage you to go back and listen to that as well, because it really does feed into this topic we're talking about. So Perry, let's say that there's a listener and they started this episode thinking, I'm ready for a superintendent. And now they're like, I don't think I'm quite as sure about that anymore. What would be their next steps to get involved and maybe get this workshop going on in their district?
Well, a board member, a listener who wants to learn more about this workshop should confer with his or her board president. That person typically will introduce the prospect of completing this workshop to the board. If the board is interested, then a designated individual, usually the board president or the superintendent, will initiate contact with the board's assigned outreach and training director. Thereafter, follow-up dialogue will occur until the workshop is scheduled and delivered.
Perfect. Well, I hope a lot of our listeners and board members take advantage of that opportunity and can get this going in their district. I think it's going to be really, really helpful. So Perry, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and talking about this new workshop. I think it was very beneficial for our members.
Oh, thank you very much. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you for your dedicated volunteer service to public education. If you would like to stay up to date with future episodes, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or your platform of choice. Have a comment or question? We welcome listener feedback and invite you to send us an email at communications@iasb.com. Thank you.